Hi, everybody. This is a slideshow on incorporating research into your paper. So, a prior slideshow from last week or even late the week before discussed how to find the research. And remember, in terms of research, you're looking for at least three sources, credible, authoritative sources, mostly from the TCC library databases that support your thesis. So you have your thesis to start with, but the research is what supports what your stance is and what the argument and claim you are making, as well as your reasons. So the research that you're finding, whether it's facts or statistics or data, all of which must be cited, as well as expert testimony, all of this um, must be incorporated into your paper and cited correctly. So that's what I'm going to talk about here, is how to do so, and then we'll talk about how you differentiate your research from what you're saying with your stance and your claim in your paper. So we think about incorporating research using the ICE method, ICE, introduce, cite, explain. So you should briefly introduce a quote or a paraphrased idea from another source, then cite it and then explain it. This method is often referred to as the ICE method of integrating quotes. So let's talk about introduce first. When introducing your quote, you will provide the context of the quote as well as who said it. You can use what's called a signal phrase to introduce the quote, with a signal verb that indicates a particular writer's words, or your paraphrased words of the writer's idea. And here are some examples of signal verbs. You don't have to use all of these, of course, or any of these, but um, any of these are good besides just the word says. And you can always come back to this chart on the video if you're struggling to look for a word in your signal phrase that introduces your quote or paraphrase well. So according to X, if this is the name of the author, and sometimes if you know who the author is, you could give their title. X, a climate scientist, maintains. In her book, one climatologist asserts, and I'll show you if you decide to use this way to introduce your quote, how it's actually cited in the paper in the next part C. In the article, the writer concludes. This is where perhaps you don't know who the writer is. If you found an article and there's no way you know who the author is. Or you could also say in the article's view. Notice in a couple of these up above that they don't have quotation marks. So this one, for instance, right here, I didn't put quotation marks around what the article was saying. I'm just suggesting here that you might be paraphrasing instead of quoting. And remember, a paraphrase still must be cited because it's not your original idea. It's the idea of another source. Okay, introducing without a signal phrase. That's a possibility as well. You can use an entire sentence as an introduction to the quote, especially if it fits the point you have just made. Now, if you do so, the sentence will be followed by a colon. So there's what a colon looks like, 2 dots, and then the quote. Especially if you're paraphrasing material, you can integrate the material into the paragraph and sentence so that it flows naturally with your own ideas, still citing and explaining it, of course. So you always want to make sure that whatever you're citing or paraphrasing from another source is differentiated from your own work. I need to know where you got certain information. The only things I don't need to know, essentially, are common knowledge, facts, or ideas, or cultural knowledge that everyone knows about, things that you didn't have to look up, and ideas of logical arguments, such as cause and effect or logical deduction from your own head. All of those don't need to be cited, of course, but anything that you actually look up must be cited. And finally, in introducing, there may even be a rare occasion when you can put a phrase at the end of the sentence rather than the beginning. So that's how we think about introducing quotes or paraphrases that you find as research. Next, we get into the citing part. After your signal phrase and paraphrase or quote at the end of the sentence, you will use parentheses to enclose the author's last name only and page number if you have not put the author's name or the article title in the sentence. If you included the author or article's name in the sentence, then you do not need it a second time in parentheses. If you cannot find page numbers in your article, you don't need to put fake page numbers. That is, you don't have to just label a page 1. You don't have to use paragraph. I know you may find that information in detail from some other MLA source, but for our purposes here, and most of the MLA papers I've seen that are correctly cited, because you have the website in your citation at the end, you don't need the paragraph number. Here are some examples. So it's the same examples of the signal phrases from the prior page, but now I put what would go in parentheses. So let's just start with one of them here. X states in her article, and then you have a quote, and then you have the page number. Now remember, if you can't find a page number, you don't need anything in parentheses. All you would have is the author's name in the signal phrase. Similarly, as X observes, this one, in her book, one writer asserts that, if this is how you're choosing to cite the sentence, this is where you would put the author's last name and page number, because you don't have the writer's name in parentheses. In the signal phrase. It therefore goes in parentheses. Here's one, for instance. It's an article called The Seven Seas. In the Seven Seas, the writer suggests the Pacific Ocean will be subsumed into the Atlantic one day. And there's the page number, if you can find it. If the article has page numbers, then put the page number. If not, you just keep it as the Seven Seas. That's how it will be cited in your Works Cited page. So these are all different examples of how the citation will look in the paper itself. Okay, now we come to the E part, explain. After the quote or paraphrase, you must explain the significance of the quote or paraphrase. How might it relate to your thesis overall, as well as the topic sentence of the paragraph? What interpretation of the quote do you have? Does the quote support your argument? Why? Does it go against your argument? How will you refute it? Essentially, as the writer, it is your responsibility to interpret the quote for your readers and provide the significance. So of course, you don't have to answer all of these questions, but they're ones that you need to think about as you're choosing which quotes to use and which quotes to paraphrase and which facts and data and information is most important to solidify your argument and your claim. So finally, I have a sample paragraph with research following this ICE format. And interestingly, I like the way that the paragraph was done. It has some interesting points in it. However, this paper was written about 4 years ago, or 5 years ago even, and it's actually not really true with respect to this last election, although probably in the midterms it is true. So let me read it through with you and go over some of the ICE format that's going on. Here is the topic sentence. The voter is becoming so scarce in some regions of the country that local governments are conjuring up new ways to lure people to the polls. Now we have a sentence coming up that has an introduction, a citation, and then another sentence with an introduction and a citation. It's actually the same article. And then after that, an explanation of both quotes. As one article commented, with only 23% of registered voters casting a ballot in the 2013 Los Angeles mayoral race, the Los Angeles Ethics Commission has concocted a scheme to entice people to vote. So there's direct quotes you can see around the quotation. Then inside the parentheses is the article title. It is parentheses. Let me highlight this for you. Parentheses, then quotation marks. And quotation marks, then parentheses. Now, let me just verbally say, for example, if this article had had an author, instead of the title here, it would be the author's last name here. So let's say the author's last name is Smith. As one article commented, instead you would probably write as one author commented, with only 23% of registered voters all the way through, and then no quotation marks, just the word Smith. Notice there are no page numbers, so that means there aren't any page numbers in this article. The student could also have written, as an article called The Voter Turnout Conundrum commented, then the quote, and then he wouldn't have needed the parentheses. So there are several different ways to write this. He chose a certain way. Let me keep going. The article further discussed what this scheme involved. Notice he has the colon because it's a complete sentence that's introducing the quote. The scheme is to have a lottery on election day with a jackpot of $1,000 or more. Although the hearts of those on the commission are in the right place, their minds aren't quite working properly. This guy had a sense of humor in his paper. To think that offering people a chance of winning a cash prize just to exercise one of their rights is outrageous. Will it get to a point where the government will start giving prizes to people who shower daily? I believe wholeheartedly that the only way to get more people to the polls is education. In order to make voting important again, we must educate the children of America and re-educate the teens and adults of America on the importance of voting. Until we stress this issue, the numbers will only continue to decline. So he uses a rhetorical question. He uses I, but only very briefly. So you can use first person, but it's still an argument mostly from third person. He explains his ideas about the quote and why he thinks it's so outrageous, and then uses a cause and effect and a solution. So he reasons from it in his own head toward the end of this. So that is incorporating research into a paragraph and into your paper. Of course, as I read your rough draft, I will make sure I look at the source that you've included and see that it's been done correctly. Remember, you're required to incorporate 3 sources minimum, but you can incorporate more than that if you want, according to my assignment.